The views and opinions expressed in this video are those of the speakers and panelists, and do not necessarily reflect the position of the Ethos Institute for Public Christianity and its founding institutions and organizations.
And she says, the implications are clear. Without family redefined, there can be no promised future for the nation, no messianic promise for the world. The salvation of the world depends upon this redefined notion of family that celebrates the inclusion of a foreign enemy, Moabite, an immigrant widow, as daughter-in-law, wife, and finally mother. Because family is taken out of the categories of property law and firmly ensconced in the category of covenant and commitment, promise is possible. So this is a very positive way of helping us to understand how the inclusion of the foreigner becomes part of God's covenant plan for us. Let's turn now to the New Testament. And here I want to talk about the neighborliness and hospitality in the New Testament. Jesus' approach to the poor and dispossessed in society was built on the Old Testament tradition of mercy and compassion for the poor. His teachings both re-established the spirit of the Old Testament ethic, which had been kept in the practice of the law, but not in the sentiments that it was meant to evoke. And then Jesus superseded it with new and radical applications. And he did this particularly through redefining the word neighbor. Who then is one's neighbor? And we know that Jesus provided the answer to this question in the parable of the Good Samaritan in Luke 10. Which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? And his answer, the one who had mercy on him, Jesus says, go and do likewise. So in Jesus' redefinition, neighbor is no longer understood in terms of geographic, ethnic, or cultural proximity. A neighbor is simply the one who had mercy on him. Jesus' instruction to his inquirer to go and do likewise is an instruction to be a neighbor. And when we take what Jesus said about living before God or with your whole person and loving your neighbor as yourself, what he said in Matthew 22, and we take this and put it with his teaching in the parable of the Good Samaritan, we have a vision of Christian neighborliness. Christian neighborliness consists in loving the neighbor we know as much as we love ourselves, and by showing mercy to the stranger in need we do not yet know, thereby making ourselves a neighbor to him. And Jesus' teaching on who the neighbor was and how his disciples were to love their enemies was also fleshed out in the Sermon on the Mount, and it shaped the teachings of the early church in how they were to relate to pagan society. And so later on, the church fathers, such as Clement of Alexandria, Origen, and Tertullian, continued in the same vein, exhorting Christians to live in the practice of love and concern for strangers and foreigners, and in their relations with the unbelieving world. Well, we won't forget to mention Paul, because in his letter to the Romans, in Romans 12:9 to 16, he talks about hospitality too. I'll just read from verse 12. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with the Lord's people who are in need, and practice hospitality. And the word used here, philoxenia, is in English, the word xenophilia, the antonym to the word xenophobia. Xenophobia means a fear or aversion to foreigners. And so xenophilia is the opposite, a love for, a willingness to embrace those who are different from you. So in Romans 12, although verse 13 begins with the command, share with the Lord's people who are in need, the second part of this verse evidently applies not to the Lord's people, but to those who do not belong to this group. The command has a specific reference. We are to practice xenophilia, which is love for strangers and foreigners. And it says practice hospitality, and the word practice is better translated in the New Living Translation, which translates it as be eager to practice. That's what the proper meaning of diakontes means. Pursue or persecute, be eager to practice hospitality. So Paul instructs Christians not merely to be open to the possibility of welcoming strangers, but to go out of one's way to do it. And of course, among the other writers, the word philoxenia is used again. Hebrews 13:2, do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. And this is followed up right away with another command that calls on Christians to empathize with and minister to those languishing in prison. He says, the writer of Hebrews says, continue to remember those in prison as if you were together with them in prison, and those who are mistreated as if you yourselves are suffering. So again, the context here will not allow us to limit such ministry to believers who are put in prison. The writer of the book of Hebrews wants church members to show compassion to all who are imprisoned. And he underlines the command with two clauses of identification, as if you were together with them in prison, and as if you yourselves were suffering. So the early church valued hospitality as a core aspect of Christian character and good reputation. And for that reason, the criteria for church leadership given by Paul in 1 Timothy and Titus also includes the criterion of hospitality. So with that survey, let's go on now to look at our local context and situation. Foreigners and immigrants in Singapore, who are they? Finally he has a picture. Okay. Blue-collar migrant workers, a large number of whom are working in the construction and sanitation industries. South Indian, Bangladeshi, and many others. Domestic workers, workers in the restaurant and tourism industries, nurses, white-collar migrant workers or professionals. Today, many are from countries in the region such as Malaysia, Myanmar, Indonesia, the Philippines, and Thailand. Expatriates. Expatriates are not financially or socially disadvantaged, but they have needs of cultural adjustment and integration, needs for opportunities to participate in society. And their families. International students. Singapore has been aspiring to become a global education hub. And I have a statistic from 2014 which says we have 49,000 students, foreign students, studying in Singapore. That's surely a great mission field. Foreigners married to Singaporeans, and here you have a picture of a Singaporean Vietnamese couple and a Singaporean Chinese China couple. And in 2014, the Registry of Marriages gave out the statistic that 1/3 of the marriages registered in 2015 are between a citizen and a non-citizen. So there's a large number out there. Pei Tu Mama or study mamas, there are several thousand of them in Singapore. And these are foreign women, mainly from China, who have come to Singapore to accompany their children who are studying in primary or secondary schools here. One newspaper report estimated that more than half of the Pei Tu Mamas in Singapore are either divorced or separated from their spouses. So perhaps there's a need for ministry there too. This is a group that's not often mentioned, soldiers of the Gurkha contingent of the Singapore Police Force. We have 2,000 men from Nepal living here and living here with their families. These are elite soldiers recruited from Nepal to form a neutral armed force. And they have been around since the post-war period. One of the sad things I learned about their life here is that when their children reach around 18 years old, the children who might have lived here all their lives are no longer allowed to continue to live here unless they find a way to obtain a work visa. So this is one of the things that they have to struggle with. And of course, we have undocumented migrants, illegal immigrants, and overstayers. Now, there's a stigma about overstayers, but many of these have overstayed because their employments were terminated prematurely. And because of an accident or they can no longer work, their employment were terminated prematurely and they cannot go home because if they went home, the people the loan sharks or the people who will be running after them to pay off their debts. And so they're afraid to go home, and so they overstay, and they need help. And finally, there are women and children who are the victims of human trafficking and prostitution in Singapore. The struggles and hardships of immigrants, and especially foreign workers, are already well documented in many books and articles that have been produced in the last few years. And so I will not say much about this, except that we need to remember, like the United States, Singapore is a nation of immigrants. And as migrants ourselves, have we embraced new immigrants, or have we made them into others and encourage an us versus them mentality? As Singaporeans, are we interested in welcoming into our country only the best and brightest talents? Do we have no room for those who are damaged by war and persecution and need a place to belong? Earlier on, I mentioned that the nation of Lebanon has 1.2 million refugees. Do you know what the population of Lebanon is? Very similar to Singapore, 6 million. Can you imagine 1.2 million Syrian refugees living in a country that has a population of 6 million? There's great pressure on the local population there, but they took in as many fleeing Syrian refugees as they could. We have a population of 6 million people, and Singapore is one of the wealthiest countries in Asia. Can we take in some? This question challenges me because it draws me out of a set way of thinking, which I now realize is based on some kind of popular narrative. We have not received any refugees into our nation, and we have very pragmatic reasons to justify it. And ironically, many Singaporeans continue to point accusing fingers at nations that are limiting the entry of refugees. We criticize states and many other places. They can easily point a finger at us and ask, how many refugees have you taken in? And the answer is none. Okay. What is the kingdom of God narrative that I need to heed instead? This is the challenge for us. So, in the last section then, let me talk about the Christian community's response and maybe what we can do. Because the hospitality of the church is not to be extended only as a right of citizenship, can we instead extend our hospitality regardless of race, language, or religion? As we observe all that is happening in global migration and local immigration, this is an important question. What is God doing in the world today? I want to recommend for you to go further into the area of missions called diaspora missions. This is an area of mission study where people are talking about how we can fulfill the Great Commission through the migration movements and patterns that are happening in the world today. This is a fairly new area of study, but it's a very exciting area where people can start to see the hand of God at work in all that's happening in migration in the world today. What can I do as an individual? Here are some things that we can do. Know my family's immigration story. Just like how the people in the Exodus remembered that they were delivered from Egypt, and so they can practice compassion on those who are foreigners. Maybe if we know our own story as immigrants in Singapore, we might change our minds about how we behave in some things. Shape a theology of relating with people who are culturally and ethnically different from me. John Howard Yoder said once that the church has been taking the foundation of its social ethics from the world. And he says it's time for us to go back to the Bible to form a foundation for social ethics. And he's right. We need to do that. Examine myself for prejudiced views. Be interested in the culture and customs of the foreigners I meet. Understand the difficulties foreigners face. And we need to take time to do that. And get upset. I want to encourage you to get upset. When I hear or read about foreign workers being mistreated by their employers, I think there are times in our lives when we need to stand up and say, this is not acceptable. This is not acceptable. Sometimes when we say nothing, it's like we are accepting it and it's all right. It is not all right. If you're an employer, deal justly and compassionately with foreign employees. And volunteer with organizations that address the hardships of foreigners and immigrants. In Singapore, I can name you at least two. HealthServe, Hagar Singapore. These are groups that have been working hard out there and doing good things. What about those who are specifically gifted? What can you do? You can be an advocate for social justice and give your voice to those who do not have a voice. You can bring a moral voice to national debates on immigration and issues. Obviously, this needs certain skill training and being in the right position, right? But if God has given you this, I appeal to you, do this. Help undocumented migrants gain legal status, either to gain legal status here or back in their home country. A lot of undocumented migrants are lost in a no man's land. They cannot stay and they cannot go back, and they don't know who can help them. They don't know how to make recourse to the law. Participate in immigration law reform efforts. Write blogs, articles, and books, write poetry, and make films on the foreigner or migrant experience. This is for the artists in our midst. And recently, the short film that won the prize for the Singapore Youth Film Awards, I think it was a short film on the migrant experience in Singapore. It was produced by a group from NTU, the Bachelor of Fine Arts school. And that short film was about the migrant experience of a woman from China who is in Singapore with her son. It's called Changi. Become a theologian or sponsor one. Okay, I want to say this on behalf of my colleagues. Okay, if you don't know who to sponsor, we can have lunch together. Okay, and just one more portion, what your church or organization can do, and I hope you will think about this: provide foreigners and immigrants a place to belong in your fellowship. Assist in practical ways. Have classes for cultural orientation in Singapore. Teach them how to understand Singlish, Have ESL classes. Deal with immigration problems. Assist with immigration and employment issues. Assist with childcare and children's education. Increase sensitivity of our church members through education. Encourage members to accept the visitors' transnationalism. We are seeing more and more people for whom home is more than one country, and we have to learn to accept them as belonging to your congregation. Change attitudes or activities that promote a silo effect. Organize ministries for ethnic groups. Encourage multiracial, multi-ethnic leadership. And help reduce tensions between mainstream society and migrant groups in your neighborhood. If you read from the social media long enough, you know how much anger and prejudice there is in the comments that are given. Can we provide a different tone, a different picture to it? So let me close by just mentioning this. 3 days ago, there was a news that I heard was becoming viral, and it was a news of a migrant worker, an Indian migrant worker, who won the Singapore sweep, and he won $2.3 million. This news came out in The Independent, I think 3 days ago, and it's gone viral. I'm still waiting to see if that's really true. Okay. He even put a picture of the ticket number with him, and I thought, wow, this guy who earns maybe $500-600 a month, he's got $2.3 million. So there is at least one person for whom coming to Singapore and living and working here was a good idea. Okay, I'll close there. Thank you.